Imagine this. It's a quiet morning in a suburban neighborhood. The sun is rising, birds are chirping, and a 74-year-old man named James Foster, a retired U.S. Army Sergeant Major, walks peacefully down the sidewalk. He's wearing a military-style jacket with faded patches. His steps are slow but steady, his head held high. This man isn't just anybody. He's a decorated war veteran, someone who's spent over 30 years in uniform, surviving war zones that most of us only see in movies. A man who's trained soldiers, saved lives, and buried friends. A man who's served under fire and stood for freedom. And now, he's doing something simple, carrying a cup of coffee, heading home. But then, screeching tires break the silence. A police cruiser swerves to the curb. The door flies open. A young white officer, Kyle Peterson, jumps out, gun already drawn. No warning. No explanation. His voice echoes through the street. Put your hands up. Get on the ground. James freezes. For a split second, he thinks he must have misheard. He blinks, confused. "Excuse me," he says, slowly raising his hands, careful not to move too quickly. But the officer doesn't lower the gun, doesn't ask questions, doesn't look at the jacket that clearly says U.S. Army veteran. He just yells again. Down on the ground. A crowd starts to gather. A few teenagers across the street instinctively pull out their phones. One of them starts filming. And that's when the world saw what James Foster already knew. Even after serving his country with honor, his skin color made him a suspect. The fear in James's eyes wasn't just about the gun. He'd seen weapons before. He'd used them in combat. But this fear was different. This wasn't Iraq or Afghanistan. This wasn't a war zone. This was home. And the person holding the gun wore the same flag he fought to protect. You could see it in his face. Not just fear, but betrayal. He stood there, unarmed, hands in the air, trying to stay calm. He said, "Officer, I think you're making a mistake. I'm a veteran. I live right there, 2 houses down." But Officer Peterson didn't listen. His eyes were wild, hand trembling on the trigger. The people filming shouted, "He didn't do anything. That's Mr. Foster. He's a vet." But none of it mattered. For 2 full minutes, the officer kept the gun trained on James until backup arrived. Only then, after speaking to witnesses, did the officers finally lower their weapons. James wasn't arrested, wasn't even asked for ID, because there was no crime. There was only a dangerous assumption. An old black man walking slowly in a mostly white neighborhood was somehow suspicious. But this time, that assumption didn't go unnoticed. Because by the time James made it back inside his house, the video of the encounter was already going viral. Within hours, it was everywhere. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. The title said it all. Racist cop points gun at elderly black war veteran for walking while black. Millions watched it. People were outraged. Veterans across the country, black, white, Latino, shared their own stories of being profiled. And just like that, what started as a terrifying moment for one man became a national conversation. Because this wasn't just about one officer. It was about the deep, painful truth that even heroes, black heroes, aren't safe from racism. And what happened next would stun everyone, including Officer Peterson himself. The man at the center of this shocking incident was James Foster, a name that would soon trend across the country, not for something he did wrong, but for the injustice he endured. James wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was a retired U.S. Army Sergeant Major, a rank earned only through decades of leadership, loyalty, and sacrifice. He had given more than 30 years of his life to serving his country. He'd survived some of the world's most dangerous war zones, mentored hundreds of young soldiers, and returned home with a chest full of medals and ribbons, testimonies to his bravery, discipline, and honor. In his community, James wasn't just known as the vet on the block. He was a grandfather, a friend, and a role model. Local kids knew him as the guy who handed out popsicles in the summer and told stories about boot camp that made them laugh and think. Adults respected him for his calm demeanor, his discipline, and his dedication to uplifting the neighborhood. Despite his age, he walked with pride, his veteran cap always on, his posture straight, his spirit unbroken. On that particular morning, James had done what he did every day, walked to his favorite coffee shop just a few blocks away. He wore his familiar Army jacket, one that proudly displayed his unit patches, medals, and name tag. He didn't expect anything out of the ordinary, just a walk, a hot cup of coffee, and maybe a friendly wave or two. But as he strolled back toward his home, coffee in hand, completely unaware of the storm ahead, everything changed. A squad car suddenly screeched to a stop beside him. The driver's door flung open, and a voice shouted out with aggression and urgency. "Get down on the ground. Hands where I can see them." James turned, startled. The voice came from Officer Kyle Peterson, a patrol officer with just a few years on the force. He had exited the vehicle with his gun already drawn, aiming it directly at James. Startled, confused, and deeply shaken, James instinctively raised his hands. His voice trembled as he asked, "What did I do? What's going on?" There was no explanation, no Miranda rights, no calm discussion, just the cold, rigid stare of a man in uniform holding a weapon to the face of a 74-year-old veteran who had done absolutely nothing wrong. What Officer Peterson claimed later was that James matched the description of a suspicious individual reported nearby. But there was no active crime scene, no weapon found, no crime in progress. In fact, the police dispatch call, when reviewed later, never even mentioned a threat, just a vague description of a tall black man in a jacket walking slowly. That was it. That was all it took for an elderly war hero to become a target in his own country, on his own street, in front of his own neighbors. And let's be clear, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was about assumption. This was about implicit bias. This was about a society that still sees black skin, especially when it's male and alone, as a threat first and a human being second. Officer Peterson didn't see the service patches. He didn't see the veteran cap. He didn't see the man. He saw a stereotype, a deadly assumption that nearly turned into a tragedy. And that's why the community, and soon the entire country, wouldn't stay silent. Because James Foster didn't deserve to be looked at down the barrel of a gun. He deserved to be saluted. And what started as a walk for coffee would soon ignite a national firestorm. What Officer Kyle Peterson didn't count on was that everything was being recorded. In today's world, you never know who's watching, but in this case, it was a group of high school students walking home from a local sports practice. At first, they were just confused by the sudden police stop. Then they saw the gun. Then they saw who it was aimed at. It was Mr. Foster, the quiet old man who gave them water bottles on hot days and told them about his time in the military. They knew he wasn't a threat. But now he was standing frozen, hands high in the air, as a police officer shouted orders and pointed a gun at his chest. The teenagers did what this generation has learned to do when justice seems at risk. They pulled out their phones and started filming. The footage was chilling. You could hear Officer Peterson yelling, "Get on the ground." James's calm voice responding, "Sir, I'm a U.S. Army veteran. What did I do?" And still, no explanation, no de-escalation, just a weapon aimed squarely at a man who looked more like a grandfather than a threat. One of the teens uploaded the video to TikTok with a caption. They pointed a gun at a 74-year-old vet for walking home with coffee. This is Mr. Foster. He's a hero. Within an hour, it had hundreds of thousands of views. By the end of the night, the video had been reposted on Twitter, X, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube Shorts, and more. By morning, it had over 5 million views. The internet exploded. Comments flooded in from veterans, civil rights activists, community leaders, and ordinary people who had seen enough. People from every walk of life were united in one emotion: outrage. The hashtags began trending immediately. Backhand index pointing right, hashtag veteran not threat. Backhand index pointing right, hashtag justice for James. Backhand index pointing right, hashtag fire Kyle Peterson. Clips from the video aired on morning news shows. It was featured on national broadcasts within 24 hours. Major public figures began speaking out. A well-known black senator tweeted, "James Foster served his country for 30 years. He didn't deserve to be treated like a criminal." This is what systemic bias looks like. Veterans organizations issued official statements condemning the officer's actions. One Navy SEAL veteran posted, You don't point a weapon at a man like that unless you plan to use it. The officer was out of control. That could have been my father. Celebrities chimed in too. An A-list actor reposted the video with the caption, "This is America. Still, in 2025. Unacceptable." But it wasn't just social media fire. It was real-life action. People protested outside the local police department. Community members held a vigil for James Foster, holding signs that read, "Not a threat. A hero. Protect black veterans. Racism in uniform is still racism." What made the video so powerful was its clarity. There was no confusion, no editing tricks. It showed a peaceful, elderly black man in a veteran's jacket with his hands up, not resisting, not aggressive, yet still being treated like an active threat. No weapons, no crime, just assumptions based on appearance. And the entire world saw it. This wasn't a split-second decision. This wasn't a tense shootout or a dangerous situation. This was a calm man nearly killed for existing. The footage exposed the harsh reality many still face in America. That being black, even while wearing a uniform of honor, is not always enough to protect you. It was clear to everyone. This wasn't just about one man. This was about all the people who had suffered in silence, who didn't have their moment caught on camera. But James Foster's moment was caught, and it became the match that lit a national firestorm. And what happened next would be the fastest police firing in the city's history. The outrage didn't take days, it erupted within hours. As the video of James Foster, the 74-year-old Black War veteran, spread like wildfire, city officials found themselves at the center of a storm they couldn't ignore. Emails poured in. Phone lines at City Hall were overwhelmed. Reporters camped outside the police station. Protests began forming outside government buildings, with people demanding accountability. This wasn't just a local issue anymore. It had become national news. And under immense pressure, the city acted fast. By the very next afternoon, a highly anticipated press conference was called by the police department. Cameras from major networks pointed at the podium as Police Chief Daniel Hayes, flanked by city officials, stepped up with a stern expression. He looked directly into the cameras, visibly shaken, as he addressed the community. "We have reviewed the footage of the incident involving Officer Kyle Peterson and Mr. James Foster. What we saw was unacceptable, disrespectful, dangerous. Mr. Foster posed no threat. He was cooperative, calm, and clearly identified himself. For an officer to escalate the situation the way he did is completely against our training, our policy, and our values. As of this morning, Officer Peterson has been terminated, effective immediately." Gasps and whispers filled the room. It was one of the fastest firings in the department's history. Chief Hayes continued, "On behalf of this department, I want to publicly apologize to Mr. Foster, his family, and our entire veteran community. This is not who we are, and we will do better." But the city's response didn't stop there. That evening, in a move that stunned many residents, the mayor himself, Mayor Richard Green, showed up at James Foster's home. No media, no press, just a quiet knock on the door, a bouquet of flowers, and a sincere apology. Neighbors watched in respectful silence as the mayor spoke one-on-one with James for nearly 30 minutes. The mayor later issued a statement. What happened to Mr. Foster was not just a failure of one officer, but a wake-up call for all of us. It is clear we must address racial bias and rebuild trust with our community. In response, the city announced a full internal investigation, not just into the officer's conduct, but into department-wide practices. They committed to launching new mandatory training focused on implicit bias, racial profiling, and de-escalation techniques, with a specific curriculum aimed at recognizing the unique needs and dignity of veterans. Meanwhile, James Foster remained humble, but shaken. When approached by reporters outside his home later that week, he stood in his driveway, his Army veteran cap casting a shadow over his eyes, and gave a statement that struck a nerve across the country. "I served this country. I fought for freedom. I put my life on the line more times than I can count. But never in all those years did I feel as afraid as I did right here in my own neighborhood. I've had enemies point weapons at me before, but this one came from someone who's supposed to protect me. I just want justice. And I want change. His words echoed across social media, news broadcasts, and even reached Capitol Hill, where lawmakers referenced his statement during conversations on policing reform. Despite the trauma, James refused to be bitter. He didn't scream or demand revenge. Instead, he stood with quiet dignity, offering his voice not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been profiled, targeted, or ignored. His strength reminded the world of something vital. True service doesn't end when a uniform comes off. And James Foster, even at 74, was still fighting for a better America. James Foster's story didn't end when the officer was fired. It didn't end when the headlines quieted down. It was just the beginning. What happened on that quiet morning, when a 74-year-old war hero had a gun pointed at him for simply walking home, sparked a national conversation far deeper than any viral moment. People across the country didn't just watch that video. They felt it. They saw their fathers, their grandfathers, their mentors. And for Black Americans, especially Black veterans, it struck a deeply personal nerve. Because James Foster wasn't alone, not even close. In the days that followed, veterans of all backgrounds began sharing their own stories online. Many described moments where their uniforms didn't protect them from suspicion, where their skin color outweighed their service record in the eyes of authority. Soldiers who had survived enemy fire were now admitting they felt more at risk at home than on the battlefield. Veterans groups began to rally. Online communities turned into real-world movements. Petitions demanding better police training for interactions with veterans gathered over 1 million signatures in just days. Rallies popped up in cities from New York to Los Angeles, with crowds holding signs that read, "Honor all veterans. Profiling a patriot is still racism. James Foster deserves respect, not regret." And then, something incredible happened. Just 1 week later, a national veteran advocacy group announced the launch of the Foster Initiative, a comprehensive program designed to train law enforcement to identify and properly engage with veterans during stops, teach de-escalation techniques rooted in respect, recognition, and nonviolence, address racial bias in police culture with a focus on honoring veterans from marginalized communities. Police departments across multiple states, including California, Illinois, and New York, signed up to pilot the program within days of its announcement. The Foster Initiative wasn't about punishing every officer. It was about changing the system so that what happened to James would never happen again. And what did James Foster think of all this? He stayed the same man he always was, humble, quiet, and focused on the bigger picture. In an interview with a local journalist, he said, "I'm not looking to be famous. I'm not looking to sue anybody. If my story can protect someone else, if it can open someone's eyes, then maybe something good can come from all this. That's all I want." He didn't demand $1. He didn't seek revenge. He simply asked for one thing, accountability. And he got it, not through violence or anger, but through truth, unity, and the power of people refusing to look away. Thanks to one moment caught on camera, thanks to teenagers who pressed record instead of walking away, a deeply rooted injustice was exposed. And thanks to James Foster's dignity, it didn't just become a tragedy. It became a turning point. He reminded the country that you can be brave without raising your voice. That sometimes the most powerful change starts with a quiet man standing tall, even when the world tries to bring him to his knees. James Foster is more than a victim of racial profiling. He's a symbol of strength, a voice of reason, and now, a catalyst for change. And that is a legacy no one can take away.